Hello everyone. So in this video we're going to start looking at iteration in Java. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves what iteration means. So iteration just simply means to repeat, and today we are going to be looking at the for loop. There are other types of loop which we look at in other videos, but today we're focusing on the for loop. So remember, a for loop, otherwise known as a count controlled loop, because it does things a set number of times. It will always do something that number of times, which means it's the perfect loop to use when you know how many times you want to repeat. Okay, so that's when you're going to use a for loop, when you know how many times you want to repeat something. So let's have a look at the code. So, excuse me. To set up a for loop, you just use a keyword for, and then you want the rules, or how many times you want to repeat and how you're going to count, in brackets, and then you want what you want to repeat inside curly braces. So it's a lot similar, or the setup and the structure to it is a lot similar to an if statement. Okay, now you can see I have got an error there, and that's because there's one last thing that I haven't done that a for loop requires to run properly, and that is 2 semicolons inside of the condition brackets. So inside, or the first section of the condition brackets, before the first semicolon, I'm going to set up a variable, and I'm going to call it I, and that's more of a convention thing rather than a rule. I could call this anything I want and it would work, but you will often see people using I, X, Y, things like that. And I'm going to give I the value of 1 because I'm going to start my count for this for loop at 1. Then in the second section, or after or between the 2 semicolons, I am going to say when I want to stop. So I want to start at 1 and I want to keep counting all the way up until I, and I think I'm just going to keep this simple. I'll go while I is less than 10. Okay, now for the last section here, this is how I want to count. Okay, so I want to count up by 1, so I want to start at 1, then go to 2, then go to 3. So I could put I is equal to I plus 1, and that would allow me to count up by 1 each time. But there is a shorthand version of this in Java, and I can put I plus plus. So that's going to be easy for me. And then within the curly braces, I'm going to put what I want to repeat. So I'm going to use a system out, and I'm just going to say the value of I is, and then I'm just going to put I. Okay, so let's go over this before I run it. So I use the keyword for, and then inside of the curly brackets, I ensured that I had my 2 semicolons to separate it out. Before the first semicolon, I set the value of the variable that I'm going to use to count or control my count. Inside the middle bit, or the second section, I said I want to do it until this. So while I is less than 10, I'm going to do this code. And then in the last section, I said how I want to count. So if I run this, you'll see it says I is the value of 1, and it goes all the way to 9. Now the reason it doesn't go to 10 is just simply because I didn't put equals to here. So if I put equals to there, you can see it goes to 10. Okay, so that is the basic structure and the function of a for loop, but we can do more things than this. Okay, so for example, in this section here, I could say I is equal to I plus 2, and if you see me run this, you will see that now I go up in multiples of 2, and I could, for example, here start at 0, and if I run it again, you'll see it starts 0, 2, 4, all the way up to 10. Okay, and I could, it doesn't have to be 2, I could put 5. Do it again. Okay, 0, 5, 10, and so on. So, okay, so I can use it to count up multiples, so that can be quite useful. All right. Now there is something else I could do. I could start my I value at maybe 10, and then say I want to do it while I is greater than 0, and then instead of counting up, I can say I minus minus, which is the same as, well, the opposite of I plus plus. So now if I run this, you'll see it starts at 10 and counts all the way down to 1. Okay, Now there is one last thing I want to show you before we go, and this is I want to show you how to loop through a word. Okay, so I'm going to loop through a word and look at every letter as I get to that letter. So let's set up a word first. So let's say string, and we'll just call it word for the lack of my imagination, and then is equal to, let's say, hello Java, exclamation point. Don't forget your semicolon at the end. And now I'm going to set up my for loop. So for, and then open close brackets with my curly braces, and then put my 2 semicolons in. And we're going to do the same in the first section because we need this. It needs to be an integer because we're going to use it to count. And I'm just going to call it, well, in fact, this time I'm just going to call it dog, just to show you that it doesn't have to be an I. Okay, I would recommend not using dog because it makes no sense in terms of most programs, and it should really have, it should have meaning to your program. But this is just to show you that any word that is not a keyword will work. Okay, so I'm going to say, I'm going to set it to I, and I'm going to make it, sorry, instead of I, I'm going to call it dog, and I'm going to set it to 0. Not 0. And then in the second section, I'm going to say, continue to do it while at word dot length. Okay, and then because this is a method in Java, we need the curly brackets, and before that I'm going to say dog, because remember we're following dog, and I'm going to say while it's less than. Okay, so I've set a variable called dog, made it equal to 0, and I'm going to do it while dog is less than the length of word. And then in here I'm just going to put dog plus plus. Okay, and now in here, or inside of the curly brackets, the things I want to repeat, I'm going to create a character variable. I'm just going to call this C. Okay, and I'm going to make it equal to word dot character at, and I'm going to use position dog. Okay, so now the value of C is going to take on whatever character dog is pointing at. Remember, dog is the variable we're using to keep control of the loop. So it will start at 0, so the character will first point at H, and then every time we go up the loop it will count up like that. Okay, and then I'm just going to use a system out to say, well, let's just put C. Okay, I won't put anything else to it, I'll just put C. And now if I run through this, you'll see hello Java. Okay, so you can see we are starting to use more of the methods that are involved with strings. So if you're not sure about them or you can't remember, please look back at that video. But this is basic functions or basic structure of a for loop. Okay, things to remember: this thing here can see anything that isn't a keyword, and it should have 2 semicolons in front of the first one is where you want to start. Second one, you want to do it until this point, and the third one, how you want to count up. Inside of the curly parenthesis is the things you want to repeat. All right, now that is for loops, and I'll see you in the next one where I think we're going to look at while loops. I'll see you then.